A swift reading through the New Testament can lead one to conclude that this great literature is, for the most part, a collection of testimonies about how the risen Lord appeared, showed himself, made his personal presence known to individuals and communities within the early church. Some of these testimonies are quite dramatic. Others are rather undramatic and run-of-the-mill encounters between Jesus and the earliest believers. Many weeks, the appointed texts are a major challenge for the preachers to find the connection of meaning among them. I challenge you to do that week in and week out, but some weeks it's a real stretch. But this week is more apparent than usual. All of our readings demonstrate to us the many and various ways the Lord revealed himself to early believers. So let us take a look at our appointed readings this morning. Acts 9, the story of St. Paul's conversion. Here a zealous Jew named Saul goes to the high priest in Damascus to get permission to threaten and round up Christians. Saul, later to be called Paul, persecutes and drags early believers into prison. But one day, on his way to Damascus, a flash of light blasts from heaven, and Saul suddenly falls to the ground to hear a loud voice, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Saul asks, "Who are you, Lord?" And the Lord replies, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. So get off your behind and enter the city, and you will be told what to do next." What a dramatic story. Sometimes I'm envious of Paul. Sometimes I wish God would just come out of a bolt of lightning and just tell me what to do. The risen Lord meets Saul in full stride and creates an about-face in his life. The once zealous persecutor of Christians becomes the church's greatest missionary and preacher of the gospel to many nations without an automobile or a cell phone. In our second testimony from the book of Revelation, the risen Lord makes himself known to John of Patmos through a collection of visions. Then John looks and hears a great scenario of dynamic worship. Angels are surrounding the throne of God with living creatures and elders. They number in the thousands. The vision and audition is filled with the sights and sounds of music and anthems and majestic hymns that have the potential to open a window to heaven, to help downtrodden people see the future God makes possible, to help them appreciate the larger reality of divine life of which all creation is a part. All are singing with full voice the marvelous hymn, "Worthy is Christ the Lamb who was slain, blessing and honor and glory and might." We just sang it a few moments ago. What power this vision must have had for John and the early Christians who were persecuted and forced underground lest they be thrown to the lions. In the midst of persecution and violence, worshiping in caves by candlelight and these little tiny oil lamps, they sing to the top of their lungs to the Lamb, blessing and glory and honor and might. The resurrected Lord makes himself known to a persecuted community with a vision and a new song of praise to be sung with angels and archangels and all the company of heaven. There are persecuted believers in many parts of the world today who get the connection with this very strongly. Finally, in our gospel reading, the resurrected Lord appears in less dramatic fashion to several of the disciples in Galilee. The disciples are back to ordinary life with the fishing enterprise. Simon Peter says in a matter-of-fact way, "I'm going fishing, boys." That night, they catch nothing. Zip. But who is standing on the beach early in the morning? Jesus. "Children, you have no fish, do you?" Jesus tells them to drop their nets one more time. I'm sure they were a bit skeptical about that. Bingo! The disciples are thrilled. An abundant catch. But more importantly, it is the Lord who is with them. Jesus then invites them to bring some fish and join him for breakfast by the sea. The disciples realize it is the Lord when he takes the bread, gives it to them, and does the same with the fish. We've heard this before. The same Lord who before his death shared a meal with the disciples also shares a communion meal with them after his victorious resurrection. The resurrected Christ comes back to the disciples and meets them in their plain, old, ordinary ruts and routines. Today, we have three separate and diverse testimonies of how the risen Lord showed, revealed, made himself known to the early believers. Scriptures speak forth through diversity, not uniformity. The Lord speaks to us in many and various ways. Saul was struck down by a one-on-one encounter with a flash of light and a sudden voice calling him to mission. "Saul, Saul." John of Patmos bears witness to a bold vision of the Lord's presence, drawing a community into hymns of ebullient praise. And the Lord meets the disciples at an ordinary breakfast on the seashore in Galilee. All are different ways in which the Lord made his living presence known. So, brothers and sisters, you and I are blessed today to be recipients of the Scripture's many and various testimonies to the presence of the living Lord. We are touched by the splendid diversity of these shared experiences, unified by the common dynamic of the risen one initiating a personal relationship with arrogant, downtrodden, and confused people who struggled with issues of faith and life. Grounded in these testimonies, we discover that we too sense the nearness of the Lord and the promise of his presence as this very word is kept before us and made alive within us by the stirring of the Spirit. Our experiences are as varied and as numerous as the ones found in the New Testament itself. So, we are called, and I know this is a challenge to us as Lutherans, we are called to bear witness today to the Lord's living presence in our lives. How, in our own way, in our own personality, can we share the impact the risen Lord has on us? We are called to keep these stories in circulation, to share them. For in the sharing and the telling and the recounting, we celebrate the richness of God and the exciting ways that God initiates a relationship with us in steadfast love. The Lord God continues to come to us, to abide with us, to pick us up, and to send us out to proclaim the good news of forgiveness and new life. In many and various ways, the living Lord spoke to the people of old. In many and various ways, the living Lord continues to speak to us. Thanks be to God.